Greetings. Today's show is a little bit unusual to what we usually do. We're focused on the fact that where oil prices are based on the Saudis and OPEC really impacts the stock market and Tesla greatly. So we wanted to look at this today because this is going to play a huge variable in whether or not Tesla meets its $360 price target and therefore is able to get the benefits of issuing bond and stock and retaining another $500 million that helps in the growth process. We also take a look at what happened in the stock market this week with Tesla stock. And then finally, just a little bit of cleanup items in terms of management turmoil at Tesla that we talked about in the Dr. Elon and Mr. Hyde piece that was written. This is Greg for Teslafaninsight. I want to thank you again for joining us. Today, we're broadcasting from a place called the Caribbean Grill, and this is a Jamaican delicacy. It's called escovitch fish. So it's kingfish in a really nice sauce, and we're at a place called Caribbean Grill, which is really good food here I believe we're in Forestville, Maryland, and it is fantastic. Highly recommended, and I decided to shoot from a different location today. I'll show you guys around after we're done with the show. So there's an interesting problem that's popped up, which is there's a process that goes on between the Fed and the stock market. What's happening right now is interest rates are fairly low. There are a large number of folks like retirees that need consistent income that's predictable. So what happens is as interest rates continue to rise, many people like these individuals will leave the stock market to get the safety of high interest bonds that are government bonds. So you can see why increasing interest rates equals a lower stock market, and we've kind of been seeing that occur in recent days. The other thing that's going on in terms of reasons why the Fed raises interest rates is something called inflation. So why is this important, and why do we bring this up today? It's quite simple. It turns out that if the Fed sees inflation accelerating, it will raise interest rates. Those rising interest rates destroy the stock market. So one of the background variables that's going on in the whole discussion of Tesla's stock price and where it's going to be as we go over the next few weeks is the fact that as oil prices fall, oil represents 2% of the cost for everyone. So if you're in a room right now, look around the room and you'll notice that every producer of goods in that room has a base cost of fuel impacting their operations. And so those fuel costs reach broadly into society. And I'm kind of bringing this up right now because it turns out is if oil prices are falling and falling dramatically, inflation is actually falling as well. So the incentive for the Fed to step in to raise interest rate either diminishes, declines, or there's an inclination to keep those rates the same. What everyone has been anticipating as the market has been falling is the fact that the Fed would continue to raise interest rates to control inflation. And now that oil prices have fallen to help out the Fed, we don't have to worry about that. Another aspect of how oil prices influence things and Tesla is the fact that when there's a $100 price on oil, there's a whole bunch of people trying to save money. They're not buying SUVs, they're buying fuel-efficient electric cars. When the oil prices are around $30, $40, $50 where they are now, people are incentivized with $2 gas in some places to buy large SUVs because it doesn't hit their budgets as greatly. So therefore, we have a situation where OPEC/Saudi Arabia can control economies like the United States because if they can keep the oil prices relatively modestly in that 50s to 60s range, they can make sure that people don't go into heavy conservation mode and reduce consumption. And so it's a very interesting dance between what's going on with supplies of fuel and how those supplies can influence what's going on in the stock market. Right now, we're in a position where, in theory, prices have moderated because OPEC has agreed to cut supplies, because of oversupply impacting what prices are. It's not known if this is going to totally work, but they've made the change, and we'll see if in fact this change takes hold. But nonetheless, it really illustrates the fact that if inflation is high, the Fed has to raise rate, it destroys the stock market. If interest rates are low / oil prices are low, the Fed is not incentivized to raise prices because the inflationary pressure, at least from oil, isn't there. And when you have one input to inflation like that that's significant and it's under control, you now have a situation where there's an incentive for the organization to moderate. So I think this whole thing is kind of fascinating because as you roll through this discussion, you can start to feel why the stock market is on somewhat of a roller coaster. And now let's port all this discussion over to Tesla and what's happening with its stock price, et cetera. And the bottom line is that if the markets are high and doing well, Tesla doing well fits nicely into that narrative, and the stock price continues to rise and do very well as we've seen in recent days. If in fact the whole market is crashing, Tesla has been able to weather most of that storm with relatively minor declines, but it's still impacted by negative market sentiment, and therefore it's worth noting kind of what's going on in the general marketplace, a la what I just described, and one can use that as a way to gauge, what things are going to look like in the future, both for the stock market and possibly for Tesla. The next thing I wanted to sort of jump into is sort of trajectory of certain stock prices and how it starts to happen. So right now, we're expecting Tesla, I believe, in the first week of January or so to announce earnings. Prior to then, we're going to start getting fairly close estimates of the number of vehicles produced and the implied revenue from those vehicles that Tesla might have enjoyed. And so I believe that they did a nice push to get out a larger number of cars than expected. Hence, we're predicting 65,000 Model 3 produced, and then the Model X and S numbers staying the same or slightly lower. Not a huge deal, but that overall number ends up being strong and delivering more revenue than everyone expected, which is what we're all forecasting and why all these analysts are raising their estimates, because they get information flow we don't by the ability to hire people, to interview folks and sit at the factory to find out what's going on. So the bottom line is that Tesla's doing a good job of producing. We're expecting very strong numbers based on rising production counts on Model 3s. There is a little bit of cannibalization going on the Model 3. This brings us to the next sort of interesting what is going to happen question on Tesla, which is, it was just announced that Tesla, starting in late January, would start shipping 3,000 cars a week to Europe. Now, if the company is producing, call it 7,000 vehicles at its apex, it's about 6,000 vehicles without pressure that they're producing a week. 3,000 goes to Europe. Maybe 3,000 stays in the United States, but in theory, perhaps 500 to 1,000 a week might end up in the Asia market, particularly with China. It starts to imply that the U.S. is going to have somewhat of a backlog of orders for new Model 3s heading into the new year. So for those of you who are thinking about purchasing, I'd encourage you to think about doing it earlier than later, because we believe that actually Europe has twice the sort of demand and interest in the Model 3 that we're getting in the United States. So therefore, it's a good time to get your vehicle before it becomes hard to do so, based on those cars being betrothed to buyers who've signed up for them in Europe or Asia. The final thing that we wanted to cover today is kind of, in general, looking at what we should expect next in terms of the next couple of weeks. I think the answer is huge volatility, given that there's a possibility the government shutdown occurs and a change in Congress. The market tends not to like uncertainty. Once things are known in terms of what's going to occur, we tend to see some stable activities, and that's just not been the case. So I'm hopeful that Tesla is able to meet its $360 price target and have the freedom of options that comes with that, rather than being sort of hamstrung by a government or a market situation that's unpredictable. So in general, that's sort of the analysis of what we see going on there. There's one last thing that I wanted to include in this show today, and I'm kind of calling it sort of a discussion of sort of where we're going with the Model 3, and in particular, the next show we're planning right now is somewhat what I call Model 3 porn. Tesla just presented to the press some new video of a Model 3 being put together by robots, and it really shows Elon Musk's dreadnought ambitions. And so I think it's a really cool piece of video, and it's the focal point of our next show, in addition to sort of some updates on what's going on that we just learned about with the black matte finish semi. So we look forward to presenting on that next. I'm going to finish up our show today with a look at the Jamaican food I'm about to dive into, as well as a look around our restaurant, Caribbean Grill, where we've been before. I just think it's a terrific deal for great food. If you get a chance, highly recommended. Remember, 20 leg lifts a day on each leg. Don't eat within 2 hours of going to bed so you don't get acid reflux or cancer. And also, half-hour walk wouldn't be a bad deal for a good health maintenance process. Wanted to thank you all for joining us. This is Greg for Teslafaninsight. Tschüss, German, au revoir, French, la hitrot, Hebrew, Khoda Hafez, Farsi, farvel, Dutch, adios, ni hao ma, Chinese, and in Jamaica we say, enough respect wa woodman. So, we're kind of in one of my favorite spots here, Caribbean Grill. So this is kind of the setup of our restaurant here. And as far as food goes today, I'm having our meal consists of what's called beef soup. It's beef with red peas, as you can see. Fantastic, especially at $4.50. And I'm having what's called a fried dumpling, which is what's in this bag. A little bit of not so healthy, but still unbelievably great tasting. Thanks again for joining us. This is Greg for Teslafaninsight. Look forward to our next conversation. Have a great day. Bye for now.